Welcome to the Impact of Bibliotherapy on Systemizing, Empathizing Reading Achievement and Gifted Students. My name is Michelle Ptacek. I am a teacher and also a graduate student at Morningside University, and I have several endorsements. The problem that I found is that gifted students are neglected by public schools. They're easily ignored among other competing issues. This comes in the form of funding, attitudes, and lacking information. General education teachers also often lack training. This neglect funnels down into an influence on mental health and underachievement. They're lonelier overall and challenged only 15 to 30% of the time. So why did I choose this problem? I'm interested in the mental health and underachievement of gifted individuals, along with being interested in bibliotherapy, an underappreciated idea in education. Important understandings before we begin include the definition of giftedness. It actually lacks a strict definition, but for the sake of this study, it's above average ability, task commitment, and creativity. Empathy also needs to be understood to understand my study, so it's the internal motivation to understand others, whereas systemizing is the internal drive to understand rule-based systems. Twice exceptional learners is also an important term. Individuals who excel in one or more area while experiencing a deficit in another area. Think Asperger's, where they struggle with social things. So, first study on gifted pull-out programs. Gifted students have lower self-disclosure scores as found by this 2012 study involving 330 gifted students that were lonelier than the general population. Lower in self-disclosure is a hypothesized reason for the loneliness because it takes self-disclosure to form close relationships. So the impact of the study, students in pull-out programs actually increased assertiveness and empathy, but the problem was the subjective nature of self-reported questionnaires. Now a study that I found on empathy interventions. So people with autism spectrum conditions may first listen to music because of systemizing aspects, such as patterns or interrelated parts, and the math present in music theory. Then they use this music to self-reflect. Now, the researchers just argued that there should be more empathy research, music, poetry, and reading. Now, they're interrelated but not the same, so I wanted to do a study on reading. Sociocultural poetry gets closer to bibliotherapy. This was a study, you can see it's outdated, in 2003 on gifted students in 10 diverse schools. Readers interacted with the lived experiences of others to supposedly improve their higher functioning capabilities. Sociocultural poetry was found to help students gain an empathetic understanding of others, and the growth was probably due to vicarious immersion. However, the problem is this is not bibliotherapy, and the study also offered no quantitative data. Before looking at the bibliotherapy intervention study, I think it's important that you understand what bibliotherapy is. It's a four-stage process of identification, catharsis, insight, and universalization. The effectiveness of bibliotherapy on inducing prosocial behavior can be explained by several theories we'll talk about later. Bibliotherapy, the intervention that I looked at in 2014, was a 6-week-long study with a diverse class of 17 students. The teacher collected data using a variety of methods listed there. And the impact was that the data collected implied bibliotherapy is effective, and it influences a vast array of social skills, including not interrupting, tolerating others, and listening. The problem is that, like most bibliotherapy studies, it was not related to gifted students, and empathy was not specifically addressed. So to recap the gaps in the research, the 2012 study did not detail the pull-out program's activities and did not address the role of bibliotherapy. In 2015 and 2003, those studies proved that music and poetry can increase empathy, but those are not subjects taught in the core curriculum by enrichment teachers. The 2014 study shows that bibliotherapy can have an impact on social competence, but what about gifted students and what about empathy? So as a whole, it's outdated qualitative correlation and lacking correlational and just lacking cohesiveness related to the specific problem that I had, leading me to the question, can gifted students not receiving official therapy, but nonetheless struggling with aspects of their mental health or social relationships, be assisted more purposefully by bibliotherapy in a guided reading pull-out program? So the purpose of this study was to look at empathizing, systemizing, reading achievement, and have this be in gifted elementary students. My hypothesis was that bibliotherapy was the intervention that would raise empathy quotients, raise overall reading achievement, and have this be done on quantitative data measurements where it didn't negatively impact the systemizing of the students. So my variables, the independent one was bibliotherapy. You can see it here in these books that I used. My dependent variables, I had several: empathy, systemizing, and reading achievement, as measured by the ES quotient and the MAP test, which many of you are probably familiar with. So quantitative research will help me to determine the impact of bibliotherapy is what I thought, And the results of this study might be able to be used to help justify pull-out programs and provide evidence of increased reading achievement because gifted students deserve the right to grow as well. So I chose an A/B experimental design with a small number of students available. It was kind of the only design optional for me. My participants from a rural school, 6 of them, 1 was a girl and 5 were boys. These were the students that were identified as gifted at the beginning of the year, and I'm the person in on that. It's finding students at the 90th percentile of the MAPs and the IO assessments, and also using creativity and behavioral checklists. They all used MacBook Pros to take their MAP test. The curriculum I used was Junior Great Books, and that additional Bibliotherapy book that was mentioned offered interactive activities, writing activities, and that was outlined on specific pages. The dependent variables, once again, reading achievement, it got measured by the MAP test, and the empathizing and systemizing, measured by both the children's ES quotient that the teachers took about specific students and the children's ES quotient for the students themselves. This started in September, where I gave them the MAP growth reading test, and the homeroom teachers took the ES quotient, and the students took the ES quotient. Then they presumed to have 4 30-minute sessions each week of bibliotherapy, and I did the testing again at the end of 15 weeks. Junior Great Books Series 3 had a book theme of 3 books on kindness, whereas Junior Great Books Series 2 had a 3-book theme on compassion for the upper elementary group. It wanted me to comment quickly on the reliability and validity of the measures. You can see that the MAP growth reading test is widely used and has many reliability correlations that were high. Children's ES quotient had high validity and high coefficients for the empathizing items and the systemizing items, along with test and retest reliability that was high. Now, modified questions. I had to do this to the children's ES quotient. You can see that I would say this child likes to look after other people when the teacher was filling out the questionnaire. And if the student was filling out the questionnaire, I said, I like to take care of people. So you can see that in questions 1 there. Now, the data analysis that I conducted was monitored using baseline data and final data points with paired t-tests to interpret the 2 sets of data. When we look at the results here in Table 1, the hypothesis that bibliotherapy positively impacts reading achievement and empathy while not diminishing systemizing was supported. Reading achievement in the baseline means, you can see, goes up along with empathizing. The baseline means to the treatment means go up. Although when you look at systemizing, they remain within a 1-point range. And that's what was expected, that the systemizing wouldn't be impacted. When we look at the p-value, which is very important, you can see that reading achievement and empathizing fall under that 5% threshold, which is important, whereas the systemizing and whether it was the teachers or the students didn't seem to be as impacted enough to make a statement. You can also see the standard deviations and the t-values in this. Now, the interesting finding that I found was turned into my figure. This has to do with the ES test empathy scores that the teachers took based on the participants. So you can see for each participant, the teacher assessed that the empathy of the student went up from the baseline until the treatment phase. The implications of this study and what I learned, the results of this study confirmed my prediction that bibliotherapy positively impacts empathy and reading achievement while not diminishing systemizing. My current reading curriculum is influenced by this because it makes me think that Junior Great Books work, and I'll continue to use them. These findings also lend support to the following theories. Social cognitive neuroscience, which uses modern science and technology to look at neural networks of the brain and prove that empathy exists. So empathy is observable yet subjective, and more studies on empathy should take place. So my current study helped fill this gap. The environment was what was manipulated, and an observable form of empathy was measured by teacher opinions, while a subjective form of empathy was measured by the student survey. Social learning theory. This one offers insight and observations on human behavior. Empathy is a subjective experience, and it's not only influenced by nature, but also by nurture. So I wanted to take on looking at the component of nurture, because empathizing is a social activity according to the theory. Key aspects of my classroom reading environment were changed, and structured social experiences of modeling and reflecting help explain why the empathy increased according to this theory. Cognitive apprenticeship was new for me. It treats empathy as a skill, that learning any new skill is assisted by reflecting reflective journaling, and useful feedback. So it explains how and why people of all ages observe, imitate, and learn from others. So as a teacher informed about bibliotherapy, specific to my study, I served as a role model, reflecting on events and emotions, and offered individualized feedback and small group instruction. It also fits in with the way the characters are able to be role models for the students. Constructivism, a popular one, where we're active in creating our own meaning. So in this current study, the four-stage process of bibliotherapy aligns with constructivism's core assumptions. And those four stages take critical thinking, and they take the construction of meaning to form mental representations that are especially built in step 4, which we often as teachers think of as generalization. The ES theory is a controversial theory having to do with autism. So in this current study, the boys had higher systemizing scores, which is consistent with the theory. And the baseline and systemizing scores were higher than empathizing scores for a gifted population susceptible to twice exceptional tendencies. This current study did not, however, lend support to the idea that systemizing and empathizing are a continuum in the brain. That was brought into question because systemizing did not decrease as empathy increased. Past research that we looked at earlier. Small group bibliotherapy reading instruction appears impactful and supports the pull-out model of instruction for increased reading achievement in gifted students. That confirms the 2012 findings that we had. Bibliotherapy appears to benefit this population's emotional state, and that's in the domain of empathy. This expands upon Ingram's study from 2003. And bibliotherapy is effective for influencing an array of social skills, including those connected to empathy that are listed there, fitting with the 2014 study. Now, what's the impact on students? Bibliotherapy seems to offer several advantages to participants. So these include small group reading instruction. It could aid growth. So even with inclusion, pull-out models have their place. Empathy can be increased without diminishing systemizing. So that has implications for younger students whose neural pathways develop. And increasing empathy helps participants reflect, maybe even better comprehend what is read, and that remains to be studied. Educators, mental health concerns can be addressed at the same time as reading needs. That's the biggest deal. Underlying a variety of mental processes and increasing both learning and life satisfaction are the role of empathizing and systemizing. So why not study them more? And why not defend our programs and in higher education, study systemizing and empathizing in educational research, not just psychological research. For parents, the impact is expose children to books. Okay, book choice matters. Help a child deal with emotional issues through the book choice. And also, if you have a gifted child, their educational placement does matter and influences attitudes and future potential. Limitations in my study, it was too short. They only met with me for 2 hours each week, and participant sample issues were the biggest ones. Only 6 students, the gender wasn't evenly split, which can have impacts on systemizing, and all of the students were under 11. Other influences or limitations include confounding variables. Does empathy naturally increase with age? That could influence my study. Also, the homeroom teacher's style of teaching could impact both the reading and the empathy, and parental influence was not standardized, and they did not take the ES survey. Also, a second control group wasn't present, and it was difficult to replicate the curriculum that I chose. So longer studies need to take place, more than half an hour, 4 times a week, with a large group of participants that should be chosen in several demographics, including more girls, also older high school students, and a second control group of TAG students that receive regular guided reading instruction. So teachers who spend most of the time with students should be educated on the process and implement it with fidelity. Parents informed about the process of bibliotherapy should be included and have the ES test quotient as well. Bibliotherapy curriculum should be expanded beyond empathy and include a variety of resources to assess the student's emotional needs first, and then align those needs with a book from a designated list. That's more bibliotherapy. Also, we should just continue research to validate and strengthen these findings that happened in my study. I had a variety of references that I used, several of them here. You can see listed about twice exceptionality or about learning about empathizing and systemizing and autism spectrum disorders and how they overlap with giftedness. And that was of high interest to me. I really enjoyed the topic that I chose. I hope that you were able to learn something here today and that you can spread the message of bibliotherapy. It's something we already do. When students are going through something hard, a lot of us recognize you can choose a book or a character that could possibly guide them through that. So let's just refine those methods so we can do it better. And thank you very much.